Good evening and welcome to 1010, your top 10 news in 10 minutes. So we had some serious technical difficulties that kept us from uploading the video on time. It's a week late now and we apologize, but it will be up tonight. So hopefully we'll have a double video weekend. Now let's go to correspondent Lauren's song for our first news of the week. Lauren?
Somehow this has become routine. The reporting is routine. My response here at this podium ends up being routine. The conversation in the aftermath of it, we've become numb to this.
Thank you, Andy. Another mass shooting has happened once again, this time in the city of Rosenberg, Oregon. On Thursday, October 1st, 26-year-old Chris Harper Mercer, a student enrolled in Umpqua Community College, opened fire in his English class, ultimately killing 9 people in the vicinity and injuring 7. Anastasia Boylan, one of the wounded students, stated that the gunman ordered them to stand up if they were Christian and then said, "Good, because you're a Christian, you're going to see God in just about 1 second." The 9 victims include both students and professors, ranging in age from 18 to 67. Police reportedly found 14 firearms connected to the shooter after searching the scene and his apartment. Neighbors and acquaintances of the gunman described him as ill-tempered and skittish from his demeanor and the way that he acted. He was reported dead after an exchange of gunfire with police, and the state medical examiner later ruled his death as a suicide. As he spoke about the shooting, a visibly angered President Obama said, "That means that there is another community stunned with grief. Our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It does not capture the heartache and grief and anger that we should feel. And it does nothing to prevent this carnage from being inflicted someplace else in America." Despite public criticism for his politicizing of the tragedy, Obama pushed on to advocate for changes in gun control laws, imploring voters to keep the loss of innocent lives in mind during the upcoming election. Stunned Americans all around the country took to social media to express their sorrow and condolences for the town of Rosenberg.
Tragic indeed, and our own deepest condolences to those affected. Thank you, Lauren. Meanwhile, there is tragedy upon tragedy in the Middle East. We'll begin with the devastating American airstrike on the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan. At least 19 people were left dead after the attack, 12 staffers and 7 patients, 3 of whom were children. The charity announced that 37 others were injured. The U.S. has begun conducting investigations as to what happened, and the tentative primary suspect so far is an AC-130 gunship that had been supporting American Special Forces personnel against insurgents near the area. It was the 6th day of fighting against the Taliban insurgents, which began an offensive on Kunduz earlier this week. When the airstrike occurred, the charity allegedly contacted American and Afghan military officials, but to no avail. The attacks continued for more than 30 minutes. According to reports, the American plane, or planes possibly, struck the hospital again and again at around 50-minute intervals for more than an hour early morning, with the intensive care unit, emergency rooms, and physiotherapy ward receiving the most damage. United Nations Human Rights High Commissioner Zaid Ra'ad Al Hussein urged a thorough, transparent investigation into the attack, which he called tragic, inexcusable, and possibly even criminal. Also this week in Afghanistan, 14 people were killed when a C-130 transport plane went down over Jalalabad airport. 10 Americans, including 6 servicemen and 4 military contractors, another contractor of unknown nationality, and 3 Afghan civilians on the ground were killed. Official reports show that the plane had suffered an engine failure and clipped a security barrier, the order of which has not been verified. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced that the investigation is still underway and no names of the deceased have been released to the public. All this comes as Russia enters its 4th day of striking targets in Syria in support of Syrian despot Bashar al-Assad. CNN reports that Russian Defense Ministry confirmed 20 airstrikes in the past 24 hours around the ISIS stronghold of Raqqa, with 9 successful strikes against the terrorist group's positions just today. These strikes are proving to be controversial, as the Russian planes are also attacking opposition fighters supported by the U.S. coalition. As with all airstrikes, civilian deaths have been mounting, and miscommunications between Russian and American aircraft are raising concerns of friction between the two powers, escalating to military action. For example, on Wednesday, American planes refused to acknowledge Russian warnings of their own inbound airstrikes in the city of Homs. In any case, all of these developments are only delaying the end of the war, and the suffering of the Syrian civilians continues. Alright, this video is getting too depressing. Sports correspondent Katie June, kick the beat and give us some comfort news on the latest. Katie?
Thanks, Andy. Manchester City's striker Sergio Aguero has showed stellar play in this week's soccer game against Newcastle. To start off the match, Aguero netted a half-trick in 8 minutes with 2 additional strikes. Newcastle's 1-0 lead was soon crushed when Aguero made it 1-1 in the 42nd minute with a header. City was on the scoresheet again in the 49th thanks to Aguero once again and the support from fellow teammate Tim Krul in the 50th. Aguero completed his outstanding day of work by scoring again in the 60th and 62nd minute and was substituted shortly after his 5th. The game concluded with a score of 6-1 with Manchester for the win. Many experts say that Aguero emulated Robert Lewandowski's 5 goals in under 9 minutes match against Wolfsburg that occurred earlier in weeks. Fans are excited to see what both Aguero and Lewandowski have lined up for themselves for the rest of the season, for both players have certainly put an impact in the Premier League.
Nothing like some good old football to get us back in the weekend mood. Thanks a lot, Katie. Now, let's go to completely crush that warm fuzzy feeling with the latest on Hurricane Joaquin. The East Coast did technically dodge a bullet with the hurricane veering away from populated areas and back out to the Atlantic, but it still managed to dump record-setting precipitation. The National Weather Service called the rain life-threatening and historic, with continued threat of flooding even after the rain stops due to the soil being too saturated. Out at sea, 2 people were killed when the boat capsized in high waves, and the U.S. Coast Guard is still searching for El Faro, a 735-foot-long cargo ship that disappeared in the storm with 33 souls on board. This is day 3 of the search, and there's been no contact yet. The White House did announce a series of environmental regulations involving wetland protection and cutbacks in coal-powered power plants, but the Republicans are lashing out on the move as unpractical, oppressive, and purely ideological. They called the water regulations oppressive to farmers and complained that cutting back on coal, which is, with crude oil, arguably the axis of evil in producing carbon emissions and causing respiratory disease, they argued that it would increase electricity costs and decrease reliability. Let alone determining who's right and who's wrong in this issue. This just goes to show how divided and ineffective our government is right now. This is just one of the topics that the government is completely polarized and unwilling to compromise on. Another one of which being the debate over funding for Planned Parenthood. Congress should be prepared to be happy with its 15% job approval right now, because if this keeps up, all of their supporters are going to be down to their friends and family. And speaking of which, speaking of politics, there are tentative predictions that Vice President Joe Biden could announce a presidential bid. According to CBS, 3 people familiar with his deliberations have revealed that Biden, who had been lingering on the edges of the chaotic 2016 presidential race, is leaning toward joining the brawl next week. Should Biden join, it would be an enormous upheaval in the Democratic race. Hillary Clinton has been falling in the polls, and more previous Clinton supporters who disagree with more socialist-leaning Bernie Sanders have been turning to Biden. As a result, Biden has already established a wide supporter base without even campaigning. Of course, the report is only tentative and far from reliable. If it does come true, our producer Kevin needs to buy me dinner. I actually just made that up. It's not real, people, but you can still buy me dinner, right? No? Fine then. Finally, I swear this is the last depressing news of the week. We have Polish priest Krzysztof Karasma, who was fired by the Vatican for being homosexual. Now, the Vatican announced that the decision was made because Karasma's incendiary remarks ahead of a conference of bishops discussing homosexuality in the Catholic Church. We're not sure if it was for being gay or for having a lover. Karasma simply called his announcement an attempt to add a Christian voice to the debate, braving storms of hate mail and opposition. For tonight's science news, I first suggested that we check out the woolly mammoth that was unearthed in the Michigan soy field, but our very own Brian Kim reminded me that there are more important topics at hand. So, Brian, tell us what all this hype is about.
Thanks, Andy. NASA has revealed evidence of liquid water in Mars on Monday. They released photos of 100-meter-long streaks, presumably caused by flowing water. Researchers have found these streaks containing resins of hydrated salts by using an imaging spectrometer on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, or MRO. These streaks have appeared to darken in warmer conditions and fade in colder seasons. The hydrated salts found within the streaks would lower the freezing point of the liquid, just like how salt on the roads causes ice to melt more rapidly. NASA explains that the streaks are likely shallow subsurface flows with enough water wicking to the surface to explain the darkening. Although this discovery may seem like a minutiae, these downhill flows are one of NASA's biggest breakthroughs in their missions to find the possibility of viable life in Mars. Back to you, Andy.
And if that isn't reason enough to either want to watch the new movie The Martian, or better yet, support NASA, I don't know what is. Thanks for the report, Brian. And that was the Ten10 news of the week. I'm Andy Hong. Hope you got some rest after the SATs today, and if for reasons you're taking it tomorrow, best of luck. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week with more of your top 10 news in 10 minutes. Stay educated.